I'm Sherry Davidson. I'm a registered nurse and a diabetes educator. I'm the diabetes coordinator here. So 70% of my job is patient education, mostly outpatient education. I do see patients in the hospital as well. And then the other 30% is kind of checking on inpatients. I look at lab values and blood sugars and try to make sure that we're managing patients well. That's a form of stress, anxiety and stress and being scared. So any type of stress can make your blood sugars go up or down. Most people, they go up, but a lot of people, they go down. One of my patients was learning to drive and he was going for his test, and he took his blood sugar before he went for his test, and he failed the test. And then he took his blood sugar after, and it was way sky high. And so then the next time he went, he did better and he didn't fail, and it was okay. And so it just showed immediately how that can really, just that one little event really made his blood sugar scoop. And that's always a hard one. Everything you read will say no, but so there is a lot of literature that's looked at that just for cost and disposal and all those issues. And so they really do say that technically you can. There's no risk necessarily of infection to the person, which is what you would be concerned about. The needles are so fine that they do tend to get dull faster. And so when you look at some of the research that shows the actual needle, and after just one use, it gets a little jagged. And so it certainly can, if you're using it too much, can definitely irritate the skin. But as far as infection risk and everything, there's not really. So, I don't necessarily recommend it, but I do tell people if you're out somewhere and you forgot to bring an extra one, or you went overnight somewhere and you didn't bring, well, reuse it. Always have food with alcohol, because a lot of times people think about, depending on the alcohol they're drinking, that, oh, it's going to make my blood sugar go up, so I better not eat as much. And it's actually the opposite, because when you're drinking alcohol, your liver is metabolizing the alcohol and it can't do anything else. So people actually run the risk of a low blood sugar, because one of the functions of the liver is to also release sugar that's stored, and it can't do that when you drink. So the rule I have with that is, women, one alcoholic beverage, men can have two, and just always make sure you have food if you're going to drink something. One of the things I hear a lot of times patients say is, I just want a kind of a diabetes vacation, because it's so much work and you're thinking about it 24/7, And I think there are ways to do that. You still obviously have to do certain pieces of it, but I think you can take breaks from certain parts occasionally, depending on what your regimen is, and maybe having another person say, could you just be responsible for this piece for me for, these 2 days or something, so I can kind of have a little break. A continuous glucose monitoring is such a great tool. I don't think it's a must, but I think there are times where it's helpful. I do think if people are having hard times managing their blood sugars, or their A1C isn't matching what they're getting at home, because you can't test 24/7. And so I think for the CGM, to me, it's more meaningful to do maybe just spot checks even. It's not necessarily something, some people do it all the time, obviously, and that's great. But like you said, it's expensive, and if that's not a well-covered thing, then I'll just, see it. If somebody can do that, then maybe just do it, 3 days, a couple of times a month or something, just to kind of see what your baseline is and if there is an issue that you're not aware of. But one of the big things with sick day management is balancing the carbohydrate beverages with the non-carbohydrate beverages. And so there's a difference between staying hydrated. So you want to stay hydrated with, the sugar-free Gatorade and the broth and sugar-free Jello and, water, just things that don't have carbs in them. So drinking lots of sugar-free beverages to stay hydrated, but then also balancing with, apple juice and ginger ale. And so usually what I'll tell people is to try to think about how many carbohydrates you normally have at a meal, and have that same amount, even though it may look very different. It may be apple juice or Sprite, but also alternating it with the caloric and non-carb. Insulin is a fat storage hormone, and so it stores fat if you have extra that you're not using. And so I tend to see this with people that have type 2 diabetes more, but it definitely can be with type 1 as well, is that you have insulin that's not really being used. It's not causing low blood sugar, but it's not really being used, and it's sitting there, so it does cause you to gain weight. And so definitely trying to make sure you're using all that insulin, and exercise is the best way to do that. Women tend to run their blood sugars higher to avoid weight gain, because they know if it's high, then they're burning off the calories, kind of. So that's not good, though. Sometimes when people, especially when they're first diagnosed, they've lost weight a lot of times, and then they put it back on and they're like, uh-oh, am I going to keep gaining weight? Well, no, it's just initially kind of stabilizing. You shouldn't continue to gain from that. If so, we need to really look at that ratio of insulin you're using, because you're not using it all. Diabetes is definitely a tough disease if you don't have insurance coverage. I would just say that typically they're going to be on a different insulin regimen maybe, some of the newer insulins cost more, but we still have older insulins that still work fine, because you can buy a bottle of insulin for $20 at Walmart. If you're on kind of a generic brand, I call it. So it can be, reasonable, but it can be, the $200 bottle of insulin too. And then once again, even with glucose testing, you can buy the name brand meters that, the strips are $1 a piece, and then you can buy the others that are $15 for 50 strips. So there's definitely ways to help. Technically, yes, we do say that, you're not supposed to use them. I don't really know what happens. One of the things they say with insulin is that, a bottle of insulin, for example, is good for a month, 28 days. Well, if you go past that, it's not like it isn't working. It's probably now 98% effective. So it does lose its potency. I don't think something bad's going to happen if somebody uses it more, because some people do. Hypoglycemia unawareness, a lot of times after you've had diabetes a long time, you just aren't as sensitive. Your body, those nerves and stuff that usually warn you that you're having a hypoglycemic event aren't there. So people get really, really low, 20, before they would have any symptoms. Well, then your brain can't remember what you're supposed to do. So it can be very dangerous. So people do tend to run themselves higher, so they avoid that. What they also say is if you sometimes can run a little higher for a while, then your body will kind of reset itself. But that's not always true if you've had diabetes a really long time. Staying focused, I think, on what the end result is. Quality of life is so important. And enjoying life, though, too. I think so many people have diabetes controlling them instead of them controlling their diabetes. And initially, I totally understand that, because it is so self-absorbing and try to learn everything and stuff. But then eventually, we want to get people to where it's just part of what they're doing. Some people obviously deal with that better than others. I think support systems, of course, make a big piece of that. And I do think sometime in the future, they've said every 5 years, they say, in 5 years. So they've been saying that for 30 years. But we've learned so much, and treatments have definitely improved. So I don't know, that'll be exciting one day if they can. I think we know why. We just have to figure out how to fix it.